You said that.
All right. On page 124. This is a historical fiction. What makes it a historical fiction? You guys remember what makes
It's fake.
it's not a true story, but it's about a real place or a real time period, right?
Yep.
Historical fictions are my favorite kind of books to read. Are you my mother? That's a fiction. You're talking about the one with the bird, and he goes and asks all the different things. If you're my mother, yeah, that would be a fiction, but it wouldn't be a historical fiction. It would just be a fiction book. Okay, everybody's on page 62, and you're not ripping out those pages right now. Right now, you're on page 62, so we can read. Chase, did I start the video? Does it got the square? Okay. Thank you. It still got the square? 125. Okay. On Castle on Hester Street by Linda Heller and illustrated by Boris Kolikov. This is the essential question why we're reading. What you're supposed to be thinking about is, why do people immigrate to new places? We've kind of talked about that all week. So this story is going to be about Julie's grandparents and how they came to the United States.
I would like living in that castle.
You think so? Do you think it's a real castle? You don't think it's going to be a real castle?
Actually, it is. Because it's a historical fiction about real places.
It is. Who do you think that person standing on the castle is?
The grandfather.
You think it's going to be Julie's grandfather? What do you think his crown is? Do you notice his crown in that picture? What if they used birds to make his crown? That's kind of intriguing. I wonder what it's about.
A lie. You're lying. You're lying.
Okay, let's find out about it. Turn to page 126. Let's get into the story.
One day while
Do you guys want to take turns reading it, or do you want me to read it?
you read.
Okay. One day while Julie was visiting her grandparents, her grandfather said, "Did I ever tell you about my good friend Moisha?" You
The king is his friend.
We'll see. "You told me Herschel, the famous astronomer," Julie said with a giggle, "the one who discovered that the moon is a Matsov. And you told me about Bessie, your little cousin, who braids were so long she used to use them to jump ropes. But you never told me about Moisha. So, what do you think her grandfather is?" I think you're right. I think we should write that as our first detail, that grandfather seems to be a storyteller. Her grandfather likes to tell stories. No, because that's not enough details.
So we know that she has a grandfather.
So I think that Julie's grandfather is going to tell a story about who? Who do you think stories in this story? I think you might be right. I think we might be hearing a story about Moisha, because Moisha was mentioned in the very first paragraph and in the last paragraph. I'm going to look and see if I'm right. I don't know who she is yet, but I'm excited to find out.
She rides the goat.
Oh, you think Moisha's going to be the goat? Oh, I think you guys read a little bit ahead. Page 128. Moisha, the goat from my village in Russia. Julie's grandfather said. He pulled the wagon I rode in when I came to America. Not only could Moisha leap across the ocean, the way others jump over puddles, but he could also sing. We started singing from the moment we left Russia. 9,092 miles to go. 9,092 miles to go. After we pass that small patch of snow, we'll have 9,091 miles to go. Do you think he's exaggerating a bit?
Yes. He's definitely.
The author is using exaggeration to help create some, to show that Julie's grandfather is telling a fantasy story and that to make Moisha seem different from an ordinary goat. What kinds of things did he exaggerate with? That the goat could do what? Jack?
Sing and leap over the ocean.
Right. Because not an ordinary goat couldn't do those things, right?
No.
All right.
I went right there. You do have to write them again on here.
All right. Julie was about to join in when her grandmother said, Saul, what are you telling that child? A true story, just the way I remember it, Rose dear, Julie's grandfather said. Moisha's wagon was solid gold. It shone like a shooting star when we flew over the ocean. Do you guys think that's really how he came to America? You think he came on a boat, maybe? Oh. Did you see how the figurative language or that simile when it's shown like a shooting star? What is it talking about? It's comparing the wagon to what? Chloe? Yes. Sure. Yep. That like helps us know it's a simile. And a shooting star goes across the sky, right? Yeah. So you're saying the wagon went across the ocean just like that. That's what it's comparing to. Turn to page. Yes, turn to page 130. Oh, I see a boat on this page. I think Jack might be right when he said. That's a story, all right, but it's not true, Julie's grandmother said. Grandpa came on a boat, like I did. It was terrible. Hundreds of families were crowded together. Babies were crying. Bundles were piled over. The boat rocked so much I thought we would drown. But in Russia, life for Jews was very hard. We couldn't live or work where we wanted. Sometimes we were attacked just because we were Jews. We had to leave Russia any way we could. What does the picture show? Do you see on this page?
A big boat. An American flag on the back of the boat.
What kind of mood do you think it expresses, that picture? Scared or afraid? Why do you think that? Right, and kind of, do those faces look very happy? No. As her grandmother spoke, pictures grew in Julie's mind of her grandparents leaving the country and crossing the rough winter ocean on a boat crowded that they could hardly move. Grandpa, is that really how you came? Julie asked, looking sad. Yes, it was, Julie's grandfather said. He too looked sad until he added, but what a welcome I got when I arrived. President Theodore Roosevelt rode his horse through a blizzard of ticket tape to greet me. Hello, Saul, he said. Mighty glad you came. Do you think Grandpa's telling a true story now?
Yeah.
You think the president really came to greet him when he came? No. So, the true story why they left was because they were being persecuted, right? It wasn't a very safe place for the Jews to live in Russia. That's the true story. But Grandpa's trying to make the story what? Interesting and happy, right? And exciting. Let's add the detail that they really came on a crowded boat. Huh? Yep.
On your second detail?
Yep.
How do you spell crowded? You're talking about Zacchaeus.
It's not about Zacchaeus. All right, page 132. Don't listen to another word, Julie's grandmother said. Grandpa's brother Morris met him. The boat docked first in Ellis Island. We sat for hours and waited to be inspected. Not everyone who came could stay. If you were sick, you had to go back. I was so afraid they would find something wrong with me, but thank God I passed every test. So what happens if you were sick? Did you remember that from the other story we read when they came to Ellis Island that we read the other day?
Yes.
Where they checked, and in your practice book when you read about Angel Island, where they were checking you to see if you were okay to be here?
I think they didn't. I think this year, they want to check people if they're sick. They wouldn't have to be doing COVID.
Do they do some checks?
Yeah.
They do now.
Like COVID happened?
Because of COVID, yeah. There's checks happening at. Yep. If you decide to leave the country, they would do a check when you got back to see if you were healthy. If you weren't healthy, depending on where you were from, you might not have been able to stay, or you were quarantined in a specific place. All right. Hooray! Shouted Julie. Thank you, dear, Julie's grandmother said. She gave her a kiss and said, I have something to show you. Then she went to the closet. Julie's grandfather leaned closer and whispered to Julie, everyone who came here was given a castle. Mine was on Hester Street. It was so tall the pigeons couldn't fly all the way up to the roof. I had to carry them. It says Julie's grandmother has something to show Julie. Since we do not know what she is going to show her, what can we do?
That does not look like Julie. That's not Julie.
I know that I can use the clues from the story and the knowledge to make predictions. I know that Julie's grandmother keeps telling Julie that her grandfather's stories are not true, and she wants Julie to know the true story about how she and Julie's grandfather came to America. So I think she's going to get some photographs or letters. What do you think?
Yes.
Do you think one of those photographs might be this castle that Grandpa's talking about on Hester Street?
Yeah.
You think so? Do you think it's really going to be a castle?
No.
Let's find out. Turn to page 134. Julie's grandmother came back to the sofa carrying a box. Did Grandpa tell you about that horrible little room he shared with Louie the cigar maker and Herman the tailor? She asked as she sat down. In those days, people had to take in boarders to help pay the rent. Life was hard, and Grandpa had a pushcart. He sold buttons 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The only rest he had was on the Sabbath. Poor Grandpa, Julie said as she patted his hand. So, was life really living in a castle for Grandpa? No, it was kind of hard work, and he had to share a small bedroom, huh? Julie's grandfather was quiet for a moment, but then he said, But the buttons I had, buttons carved from diamonds and emeralds and rubies. Buttons as big as saucers, buttons as big as plates. Buttons you could use as sleds in the snow. Julie's grandmother sighed loudly. Grandpa sold small buttons, small enough to fit through buttonholes. I'll show you, she said as she opened the box. It was filled with photographs. Julie's grandmother took out the old photograph cardboard frame. It was Julie's grandfather stood next to a pushcart, which was full of buttons. So were we right? Was Julie's grandmother getting a box of pictures? Let's put life was hard for Grandpa. You can put it in the next one. Yep. You can do grandfather or grandpa, whatever one you want.
I'm doing grandpa. That's way shorter. I'm doing grandpa. I'm doing grandpa. It's grand, then PA. I'm already done.
All right. Grandpa looks so strong, Julie said. Feeling proud, Julie's grandfather found a photograph of a young girl that showed it was to Julie. This is a picture of your grandmother, he said. She was a very famous in those days. Who thinks grandmother was really famous in those days? Everyone spoke to Mr. Wiccan's beautiful daughter, Rose, who stayed home all day nibbling chocolates. Her 5 big brothers had to watch so that nobody stole her away. What do you think? Did you think Rose stayed home every day eating chocolate?
That'd be awesome.
What do you think she's going to do? Grandpa had to work 6 days a week. What do you think Grandma had to do?
I would much.
You think she worked 7 days a week? I worked 6 days a week in a factory then, sewing dresses. But it was very pretty, Julie's grandmother said, smoothing her hair. You are still very pretty, Julie's grandfather said as he kissed her cheek. In Russia, your grandmother sewed for royalty. She made stitches so small they couldn't be seen. People wondered how her dresses stayed together. That part is true, Julie's grandmother said proudly. How come you think? Did you catch the word nibbling chocolates? That's choosing a word that's more precise than just eating, right? It gives you a better picture of how that would look, right? As soon as I met your grandmother, I wanted to marry her, Julie's grandfather said. Every night I hired fireflies to fly over her house and spell out, Rose, my precious flower, I love you every hour. And Moisha and I sang love songs under her window. Do you think that's really what happened? Finally, her father let me marry her. A year later, your mother was born. No one had ever seen such a beautiful child. Then Esther and Ruthie and Benny were born when they were just as beautiful. I made them tiny jeweled crowns, and they rode around the streets in the hand-carved golden baby carriages. So, what do you think Grandma's going to say about that story?
It was true.
Oh, you think so? Enough is enough, Julie's grandmother said. From now on, I insist that Julie hear only the truth. Grandpa and I had to work even harder to feed all those babies, but we didn't mind. We had something more valuable than jeweled crowns and golden baby carriages. We had each other, and we were free to live the lives we wanted to. That is the truth. Rose, dear, Julie's grandfather said, and from now on, that is all that will pass through my lips. And then I sat quietly for a few minutes. Then Julie's grandfather smiled and whispered to Julie, Did I ever tell you the time Moisha the goat and I sang for President Wilson? Do you think grandfather loves to tell stories?
Are you supposed to write the letter?
Just write the letter that's the right answer. So you can circle the right.
Number or
Which one of these ones is right? So you would write A. Okay?
oh.
So your job is to think about what the theme of that whole story was that I just read you and put that in the box. And then you need to write a summary of the whole story.
What should we do for the summary? What should we write for the summary?
You need to use your own words to tell me the important details that happened in the story. You should have a topic sentence, like your theme that you come up with.
They went on a ship.
Oh, the illustrator? That's kind of cool.
What do we write for the theme? I'm doing the story.
Your theme. What was the whole story about, Johnny? It wasn't about storytelling.
They wrote on a boat too long.
Was the whole story just about the boat?
Grandpa's life.
It was about Grandpa's and Grandma's life. And what did they do?
They traveled to America.
They immigrated from Russia to America, right? But we heard at the very end that it was a hard life, but they had each other and they were free to live as they wanted to. Because remember, in Russia, what the Jewish people were sometimes attacked. They had a hard time working. They were persecuted, all these things. But in America, they did have to work hard, but they were free, right? And also it tells us that we had something more valuable than jewels and golden baby carriages. So, family. Yep. On a piece of paper. So come up with your theme sentence, and then you can use this to help you write your summary, or you can write your summary of the story. You need a topic sentence, which will be probably your theme. 3 detailed sentences from the story, or 3 things about that happened in the story, and a conclusion statement. So 5 sentences. Summary should have a good punctuation, so periods at the end of your sentences, capital letters at the beginning of your sentences. Okay? Thumbs up? You guys good to go? All right. You come up with the theme yourself. If that's what you want to pick for the theme from the story, you can.
Good life. A bad life. Hard life. I need a hard life.